We'll call this special meeting of the Town Council to order. Please rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If I could ask Councillor Thompson to read our mission statement.
Thanks, Mayor. Silver City is the hub of an inclusive community settled within a small town that, through guided growth, honors and preserves its historical, cultural, and natural heritage, while facilitating jobs, health, and education resources such that the residents and visitors may enjoy and protect the recreational opportunities of the area and a high quality of life.
Thank you. First item on the agenda, number 2, approval disapproval of bid 11/12-2 Gabby Hayes replacement well. Mr. Brown.
Mayor and Council, the town received one bid from Nambe Pueblo Health Care Services LLC in the amount of $849,560 plus gross receipts taxes for a total of $912,215.05. It's staff's recommendation that we award the bid to Nambe Construction. This is taking into account that we're going to have to come up with approximately $70,000 above what is remaining in the loan that was acquired to do the construction of the well. The $70,000 will actually come from we did budget the entire debt service for the loan itself, which is about $140,000, and we aren't going to have to start paying the loan for approximately until December. So we actually are saving $70,000 from the loan itself. So we already do have the funds in the budget available for the construction. I've got some information about the wells, the current well and the well that's going to be installed, if you have any questions on that.
And the additive alternate?
We're going to go ahead and do the additive alternate ourselves, in-house.
Any questions, comments? Any questions, comments from the audience? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion. Councillor Bessie.
I move to approve bid 11-12-2 Gabby Hayes replacement well per staff recommendation.
Is there a second?
Mr. Mayor.
There's a motion and a second to approve bid 11/12-2 Gabby Hayes replacement well per staff recommendation. Any discussion? Councillor Besson.
Mr. Brown, just this is going to replace the well, and so this will
Yes, the
benefits to the town.
The benefits is that the current Gabby Hayes is actually our best producing well. It's going to be a supplemental well that I believe is approximately going to be drilled about 90 feet from the current well's location. The current well depth is 680 feet. The pump depth is at 420 feet, and it can't be lowered anymore because the casing has shifted. And so right now we only have approximately 20 feet of water. The pump itself is actually about 20 feet below the water level. The new well will be drilled down to 980 feet, and we will place the pump at 550 feet. And because we can't lower, and there's very little water head basically above the pump itself, we can't pump it at full capacity. So we're only getting approximately 595 gallons a minute. And once we install the new well, the anticipated pump rate should be a little over 1,000 gallons a minute from the well.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
On the Smith Engineering report, it says we may issue waivers for the 2 items that were neglected in the bid.
We don't have to because they submitted those items.
They've been rectified.
They've been rectified, yes. That's why we didn't want to do the waivers, so that's why we asked for the postponement.
Thanks. Any other questions, comments, discussion? There's a motion, a second, no further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is approval, disapproval of ordinance number 1181, an ordinance amending town ordinance number 722, passed, adopted, and approved by the governing body of the town of Silver City, New Mexico on August 30th, 1984, relating to the imposition of 4th increment of municipal gross receipts tax. Mr. Brown.
Mayor and Council, this is the second reading of ordinance 1181, changing a portion of the adopted gross receipts taxes that was adopted in ordinance 722, dedicating it for the payment of bonds. But Mr. Muirhead, who is our bonding attorney on this project, has some recommended changes.
Mayor, members of the council, I'm Chris Muirhead with the Model Sperling firm. The ordinance you have in front of you is slightly different than the one that was the first reading, in that we've just clarified 2 things. It's added under Section 2, it is amending Section 1 of the original ordinance just slightly. Here's the background on that. When the first ordinance that you saw, it had the 25% increment broken down, 50% for A and 50% for B. The statute had been revised recently to say no town of the size of Silver City, instead of doing it 50-50, could just break it down the same way as 1/8 and 1/8, which is what Tax and Revenue is used to seeing. So what this amendment in Section 1 does, it just highlights that 1/4% is broken down into 2 increments of 1/8%. So, and then Mr. Brown and I were speaking before the meeting. There is some confusion at Tax and Revenue whether this technically is the 4th increment or not. And so to avoid continuing that confusion, let's just take out any reference to the 4th increment and reference it to an increment of municipal gross receipts. And that pops up in the title, Section 1, the 3rd line, and Section 2, the 2nd line. It doesn't change substantively anything with the ordinance. It just, the substantive part that's still material is you have ordinance number 722 passed August 30th, 1984. That is the ordinance being amended. It's in a 1/4% increment. So the changes this morning are to take out the specific reference to the 4th increment and to specifically call the division of the 4th increment, of the 25% increment, to 1/8% increments rather than a 50% division. The substance of what you're seeking to do in this amendment is change the dedication from its original dedication in 1984, which was the first increment. It's now known as the first 1/8 increment, shall be used for water system repairs, improvements, and additions. That was as ordinance number 722 initially dedicated the revenues. Your actions today will continue that dedication for now the first 1/8 increment, and the second 1/8 increment will be used to repay or redeem gross receipts tax bonds for acquiring, constructing, purchasing, furnishing, equipping, rehabilitating, it's in there twice, so take out that second one, beautifying, make additions to, or making improvements to capital projects in the town consistent with the municipal code and the municipal local option gross receipts tax. So what that second 1/8 increment does now is open the opportunities for different purposes for the gross receipts tax and the clear direction that you can issue bonds pledging that 1/8 increment for those improvements. I would add that description of purpose is as broad as the statute permits and gives latitude to the council and the staff from a policy standpoint to decide how you use it.
And Mayor and Council, and the reason for the making it a little bit, taking the 4th increment out and not being so specific is because the town is allowed 6 1/4% increments that we can adopt by ordinance. Technically, the town has adopted all 6 ordinances, all 6 increments, but officially, we've only adopted 5. And that's because when we adopted the first one in 1976, the town did it wrong. And so Tax and Rev has not recognized that. So we have 6 ordinances adopting the increments, but Tax and Rev only has recognized 5 of them. So we actually have 1/4% increment available to adopt by ordinance if necessary. And this is to avoid any confusion at Tax and Rev.
Right. This is, it's, again, tax and revenue, we don't want to add to the confusion there about whether it's the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th. Let's just say it's the ordinance imposed, in 1984, Ordinance 722. And we'll, in this amending ordinance, take out that reference to the 4th so that it doesn't further continue that confusion with taxation and revenue.
Councilor Besson.
Okay, I'm confused, because the only difference in the title that I can tell, is the addition of "the" in front of the 4th increment. But you're saying we don't want to do that, although this new title has "the" in it when the original title did not.
From a legal standpoint, I don't think it's material.
Okay, the reason why I'm asking is because you keep saying not to refer to it as the 4th increment, and I'm getting confused because you said a 4th increment rather than the 4th increment, so it gets really confusing about which way this needs to read.
Counselor, let me address that. I think the simplest thing to do in that title is to take out the 4th and insert "an" increment, so that it reads an ordinance amending Town Ordinance 722, passed and adopted and approved by the governing body of the town of Silver City, New Mexico, on August 30th, 1984, relating to the imposition of an increment of municipal gross receipts tax.
So to be consistent, you're recommending that it state "an increment" every time it says the 4th increment throughout the rest of the document?
Right, which is in Section 1, the 3rd line,
right,
and Section 2, the 2nd line. In speaking with Mr. Brown this morning before the meeting, became aware that there was some confusion in taxation and revenue.
So, Mr. Brown, I just want to clarify that we can change, even though it was originally posted as the...
Yes,
we
the
can.
important part of the posting is that there was specific reference to Ordinance 722.
Okay.
That's the one that adopted that increment that we're changing.
Yes, I am, Mayor. Thank you.
And then I would, and we'll cross this bridge when we go through the financing schedule. I was under the misimpression that this was a first reading today. So on the passed and approved line on the signature page, that will of course read the 15th day of August 2011, assuming that you decide to approve.
September.
Alex, the ordinance 722, did it only address this increment?
Yes.
Thanks.
Mayor, so the ordinance will go into effect the minute this is signed, or is there the standard period that we have to wait?
The mayor has 3 days to sign it, and then it gets published, and the day it's published in the paper, it becomes effective the 5th day after it's published.
Any other discussion? Questions? Discussion from the audience? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilor.
I move that we approve ordinance number 1181 and ordinance amending town ordinance number 722 passed, adopted, and approved by the governing body of the town of Silver City, New Mexico on August 30th, 1984, relating to the imposition of an increment of municipal gross receipts tax, with the change in Section 2, Line 2, removal of the 4th to "an" increment, and the change on the passed, approved, and adopted portion to August rather than September.
There's a motion to approve and amend. Also in section 1. There's
Section 1, okay. Also in section 1, then.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Mr. Mayor, I second that motion as stated.
There's a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 1181, an ordinance amending town ordinance number 722, passed, adopted, and approved by the governing body of the town of Silver City, New Mexico on August 30th, 1984, relating to the imposition of an increment of municipal gross receipts tax, with the changes of in section 1, 2 for an increment in lieu of the fourth, and correction of the date on the past approved and adopted signature. Any other discussion? There's a motion, a second, no further discussion. Roll call, please.
Councilor Edison?
Aye.
Councilor Thompson?
Aye.
Councilor Rowley?
Aye.
Councilor Morano?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, sir. The next item on the agenda is a presentation of bonding process and schedule by Mark Valenzuela of George K. Baum and Company and Chris Muirhead of Modrell, Sperling, Lowell, Harris, and Sisk TA.
Thank you.
You guys get some meat right here. This meeting's getting long.
Only Mr. Sisk is alive. They finally cut it off and said, no more. That's enough.
Thanks, Mike.
Good morning, Mayor and members of the council. My name is Mark Valenzuela. I represent the investment banking firm of George K. Baum and Company. We've had an active presence here in New Mexico for a couple decades, and what we do is we assist communities in accessing the capital market so that they can sell bonds for the purpose of bringing capital back to the community to build projects. Let me take you through this presentation very quickly. Please feel free to jump in at any time and ask me any questions about the bonding process as we go forward. Section 1, my company would disown me if I didn't tell you a little bit about who they are. And they got their start back in Kansas City in 1920s as cattle ranchers, actually. So they would broker cattle, and they took that skill and took it into the public finance municipal bond market. They've been going for almost 100 years now, which is a sort of a statement about their wherewithal throughout all these ups and downs in the economy. And I will tell you, it's one of the proud facts about the firm. Very conservative, fixed rate bond financing kind of firm. Did not engage in any of the derivatives transactions that you see. Sort of brought down the economy back in 2008. So, our perspective is we've been a very good steward and a very good partner with municipalities and states as this economy has kind of ebbed and flowed through it with some of the different things that have been happening. We really do feel like we're partners with communities, and we have a very credible voice. We're in the market every day trading municipal bonds, so we feel like we have a very good idea of what pricing should be for your kind of transaction. If I can jump you over very quickly over to section 2, I wanted to talk just a bit about what's happening. There's so much in the news these days about the equities market and everything happening right now with regard to ups and downs in the equities. It turns out, and let me take you to the first slide of section 2, titled Municipal Bond Market. The municipal bond market, it's a very large, dynamic market. It's not the stock exchange. It's about 4 times larger in size. More volume is happening there. And typically how we look at bond deals is we refer to what's called the yield curve. The yield curve is a representation of what interest rates are per year looking forward. And we all get a baseline on what is called the AAA MMD, which is the municipal market daily. interest rates change every single day in this market. So the pricing I'll show you today, it's good for today. It'll change, but we have, like I said, our firm, we're engaged every day, so we have a pretty good idea of where we believe the town of Silver City would price from their bonds on the date that you issue. But this yield curve is just a representation of what interest rates look like over time and what investors are willing to pay. AAA bond rating is the highest credit rating you can have. And I'll talk a little bit more about bond rates as we go forward in the presentation. But it's an attractive time for investors to be buying bonds from municipalities. They're very skittish about what's happening in the equities market, and what we've seen over the last 2 weeks is they've liquidated their positions in equities, and they've moved over to safer investments in the U.S. Treasury or in municipal bonds. So we've seen a lot more capital move into this market and out of the equities market. But it's a day-to-day kind of event, which is unfortunate. We don't have a lot of predictability about what's happening right now. Again, very safe investment. Investors understand you, and they're willing to take those chances in terms of putting their capital on bonds like this. Let me take you to the next slide, titled Series 2011 Spread to MMD, and just, again, give you a perspective on how much bond rating matters in this market. So bond ratings like our credit rating as we go to buy houses. I'm a bad credit, you're a great credit. The bank is going to charge me a higher interest rate than they would charge you based on our credit. Same thing with municipalities. Municipalities are like households. So what I'm showing you in this slide is the spread to the highest level credit, the AAA. So if you're a AA, which is still a very good credit, you'll trade off about 50 basis points or 0.5% from the best quality credit. If you're a single A, which again is still a very high credit quality, and most municipalities in New Mexico are single A credits, you're going to trade off about 1 percentage point off of what the AAA best rating is. And then if you're triple B, which is just investment grade, you see that it jumps up quite a bit to almost 3 percentage points off. So bond rating is very, very important, and as part of this process, you will establish a bond rating for the town of Silver City. Because you haven't been in the market in a long time, you don't necessarily have a bond rating right now. So it'll be a new exposure for you to the credit agencies and to investors as you go forward with this process. Let me jump over to tab 3 and just tell you a little bit what I've been talking to with your town manager about what we're trying to do here and what the bond program would look like. So I'm now in tab 3, first page, Silver City Bond Program. So the idea here would be to use the quarter or the 1/8 increment that you just passed to pay for an annual payment of bonds that you would issue and pay for over the next 20 years. The money from the proceed, $5 million of new money, would be used to build community capital projects throughout your community. And Mr. Brown can certainly take you through those, and I know he's had a lot of conversation with you about them. As the market looks, we have historic low interest rates right now. Of course, we don't know where anything is going to go, but at this point, we've been really working in a very low interest environment. Construction costs have come down from their 2008 levels. Obviously, we anticipate that inflation and construction costs will continue to go up into the future. So taking advantage of the low interest rates and the lower construction costs now is a smart financial move to lock in those rates. When you issue bonds in the market, many more people become interested in your financial statements. So investors that buy your bonds want to see audits on a routine basis. They want to see disclosure information about your revenues. So it increases the transparency of your financial management when you go out to the bond market. There's more eyes on what you're doing. And that's a good thing from an open government transparency perspective. And you're also, as I mentioned, establishing a presence with investors throughout the country. They care about who you are. If they have bonds in their portfolio that are yours, they want to know that they will be paid back that at the principal and the interest amounts. So you do establish a bond rating, and there's a requirement for you as a council and a manager and administration to do certain things while those bonds are outstanding. It's called continuing disclosure, and I can talk more about that. That you'll report your financials, your audits to these investors every single year as you go forward. That is something that I do help you with as well through this program. So in discussing with Mr. Brown and the mayor the ideas behind this bond program, we came up with the idea of issuing debt or issuing bonds every 3 to 4 years so that you have a cycle of new capital coming in every few years to build projects and to address the infrastructure needs that you have outstanding. However, we're only talking about right now an issuance of $5 million for that purpose. But you could follow on in future years with new capital, and that's the way that this would be structured so that it would allow you the flexibility to do that. Again, the revenue that you would commit to investors would be the 1/8 that you have just approved to pay off those bonds. I would encourage you and Mr. Brown to dedicate your state share gross receipts tax to the bonds as well. All that means is that you pledge it as a security. You don't use it to pay the bonds. But what it does is it shows that investors, there's stronger backing to these bonds than solely the 1/8 gross receipts tax. So that would be one decision that we can make as we go forward. But it strengthens your credit. It would strengthen your presence to investors and give a little bit more security behind the issuance. It's a very common practice that happens in many communities throughout New Mexico. The bonds themselves, you have the opportunity with some existing debts that you have out through the New Mexico Finance Authority or wherever it might be to refinance those loans. So as we've structured this right now, and this can always change with conversation with you and Mr. Brown, but we would issue a Series 2000A bonds, which would be the new money, $5 million. That would be the money for the capital improvements throughout the community. And then a second piece called the 2011 Bs. They would be issued solely for the purpose of refinancing any existing debt that you have out. Because the interest rates on those existing loans are higher than what today's interest rates would be, you have the opportunity to save money on any of those existing debts. So, and I'll talk more about that structure in a moment. It's important to let you know that those refunding bonds will not extend out the debt in any way. You will pay them off exactly on the same timeline that you had originally paid them off. All this would be is taking advantage of a lower interest rate. Let me take you to the next page and give you more details on sort of the general nature of the bonds, any statistics that we have out there. In this table, I'm showing you the new money issue, the $5 million, and the refunding. I'm also showing you on the left the bond rating scale for investment rate bonds. So AAA at the top, but for both Standard & Poor's and Moody's, is the best credit you can have. There's one community in New Mexico that has a AAA. It's the city of Albuquerque, and it's for their general obligation bonds. There's a couple counties in New Mexico that have it, and then the state of New Mexico was just put on watch that they may be downgraded. But just to give you a perspective of how rare a AAA is, there's not many entities that have it. There's a couple more that do fall into the AA category. Based on what I understand about the town of Silver City, I believe that you'll come in as a single A, right in the middle, a single A S&P or an A2 with Moody's, which is a very, very good bond rating. And it essentially means that you're a superior credit and you have the ability and the wherewithal to take on the debts that we're talking about here. But you are subjected to economic downturns like many municipalities. Your revenue base isn't as diverse as some of the other communities, like Albuquerque as an example. So that's what a single A credit. It's still a very, very good credit, and we won't know what that credit would be until you actually have the conversation with S&P and Moody's and heard what they had to say about the town of Silver City. So that'll be a process that we undertake as we go forward. But that gives you a perspective of where you might line up in that scale. On the very right-hand side of the column, I'm showing you a column called refunding savings. Again, this is where we would take your existing debts, refund them, basically pay them off, and take out a new loan from the market that would pay them off, and you would basically replace your interest rates with a lower interest rate. So as we look at the market today, your cash flow savings from that transaction would generate about almost $120,000 on an annual basis. You would save $16.5 on average $1,000. And then on the very bottom it says net present value savings percent, 3.243. The state of New Mexico requires municipalities to hit at least a 3% net present value savings positive before you entertain the idea of refunding. And in this case, you've met that. So if the market continues to hold up, we would certainly recommend going forward with the refunding, just to take those savings off the table and put them back in the pockets of taxpayers. And again, this pricing was based last week. We were in the market looking, just trying to get a sense of what your bonds would look like in the market to investors. So again, it changes on a daily basis. If I could take you to the next slide, Series 2011A, the $5 million. And we can talk about the new money. Let me stop there very quickly because I know I've said a lot. Let me just stop and ask if there are any questions you might have about anything I've said. And I'll get into the details of the new money, and I'll get into the details of the refunding as well. But
Councilor Bettis.
This is all new to me, with the exception of hearing what's happened overall with our downgrade, in the U.S. So,
yes, ma'am.
So explain to me that, let's see where I put that we pledge the state share of our gross receipts to the bond, but we don't use it. So it's
Yes, it's
sort
pretty
of like
much
collateral?
basic. It's basically, yes. Basically, what, as we've done in all of our other loans that you've been involved in, and I don't know that all of you have been involved in, but basically we're just pledging it as collateral.
Right.
But actually the only loans we have outstanding are in the water, sewer, and the sanitation funds.
Right.
So we're actually using the revenues from those funds rather than the state share gross receipts to pay those loans out.
That's what I thought. So I was
All it is pledging the collateral.
okay.
That's all.
I just wanted to.
That's great.
And then, just for someone who's new, like I am, to the bond reading, could you explain how long it takes to find out once, when we talk, I don't know, do we talk or the town talks to Standard & Poor's and Moody's, or do you all talk to them? How does this work? And then how long does it take to actually get our rating?
That's a great question, and Mayor and Councilor, it's a conversation that you have and that I will help guide you through with the rating agencies. And so what I will be doing, if you're supportive of moving forward on the bond issue, is I'll spend the next month putting together all the financials for the town. I will submit them to S&P and Moody's, and then I'll share with you their criteria for how they look at municipalities like the town of Silver City. And then we'll have a conversation with them, an actual formal presentation to them about who you are, what your revenues look like, what your community looks like, and what you're trying to do in terms of the capital improvements. And then after that process happens, and I imagine that would happen within a month and a half time frame. We actually have a calendar that we'll take you through in a second. And probably 2 weeks after we have the formal presentation with S&P and Moody's, they will publish an indicative rating for the town of Silver City and for this actual bond transaction. And at that point, we'll know.
Okay.
So,
and then depending on whether it stays with your highly educated guess, or it's below or above that, then that will shift everything else sort of down the line.
Sure.
Correct?
That's correct. And Mayor and Councilor, If it were lower than that, let's say it was a triple B as an example,
Right.
the interest rate would likely rise up. What investors are willing to buy the bonds from the town of Silver City would have to rise. If it were better, like the opposite would happen, and that would be a positive thing, which would be your interest rate would go down slightly. So.
And one more question.
Sure.
How does this all relate to the recent, from the Treasury statement that they were going to keep the interest rates low?
Well, Mayor and Council, it's a positive statement for anybody that wants to borrow money and issue bonds. So as long as we have a stable, low interest rate environment, we feel very good about the pricing that's in front of you right now. It does attract capital to this market, certainly. I think what's a stronger driver of pushing capital is the volatility in the equities right now. I think a lot of investors are looking for a safe haven, some good security that they know is not going to degrade the value of their investment, frankly, and that's municipalities. Municipalities are the beneficiary of that. So.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mayor.
Any other questions? Mark?
So let me take you through.
I've got a couple.
Yes, sir.
On looking at the statute, there's a section in 331.1 when you mention using the state share.
Okay.
A law that imposes or authorizes the imposition of municipal gross receipts tax or that affects the municipal gross receipts tax or a law supplemental thereto or otherwise appertaining thereto shall not be repealed or amended or otherwise directly or indirectly modified as to impair adversely in any outstanding revenue bonds that may be secured by a pledge.
It's a great clause, Mayor. It's a non-impairment clause.
And does that help us with the other gross receipts issues that we've been threatened with the last couple of years?
Mayor, that's partly legal and partly political, and I'll let the attorney address it. I won't address the politics either because I'm not a very good political thinker. I'm a financial thinker. I can tell you that what that says is investors are willing to buy your bonds because they know that the revenue streams that are tied to them will not be taken away, so to speak, other than the economic downturn, and that's the risk that they take. So when you tie the state share gross receipts to these bonds, it gives stronger coverage and pledge and security to those bonds being paid back from that revenue stream. So if the state, and I'm presuming here, so if the state were to come in and say we're going to take some of your state share gross receipts back from you and give it to us, the state, I think you would have a stronger argument to tell them that there are bonds secured against those revenues, and therefore bondholders would be very upset about that action, which I think would strengthen your hand in terms of protecting state share gross receipts for municipalities. I read a lot into that, so.
Okay. Mayor, on the legal side of it, I think as it implied two things. One, with the municipal gross receipts tax, which you just amended, what is that? That protects the bondholders and also restricts the city from 3 years from now saying that you want to do away with that tax. That tax needs to stay in place as long as the bonds are outstanding to pay that debt. So it works to protect the bondholders and works as a limitation on the city going forward, the town. The state shared is an interesting one. Historically, that has moved. At one point, it was 1% that came back to the municipalities. Now it's 1.225% that comes back to the municipalities, and it increased. And so that was a positive for bonds. The most applicable example of what's happened in the recent past was the medical and food deduction, and what the state did then in relation to this requirement is they make whole payments that come back to municipalities and counties that should relate to what they would have earned had those deductions not been put into place. So Mark is absolutely right that it gives you a stronger leverage to say, I have bonds outstanding, and a lot of municipalities have bonds and counties have bonds outstanding with various gross receipts tax pledges. But with the state shared in municipalities, that would give you leverage to say we have bonds outstanding, and should you impair that, we need to be made whole in some respect. And the statute provides that.
Thank you. The other question I have, Mark, is in having the discussion with Senator Smith about the food gross receipts tax, and explain to him what this process that we were looking at getting into, and because the state's not going to be able to provide capital outlay for some time, it looks like, that working with you, we were developing a process so that we could take care of our own, which is actually what the Constitution sets us up to do. His reply to me was, bonding against gross receipts is not the wisest choice to make. My reply was, that's our revenue. Are we going to have issues, or can you respond to that comment that, I mean, we know gross receipts is our foundation for almost all of our revenue, but that comment really disturbs me.
Mayor, you're absolutely right. The Constitution allows you to use gross receipts tax to provide for services for the community, including capital outlay. And specifically in the ordinance that you just amended, you allowed the municipality to issue debt against gross receipts tax against the municipal. I don't share that. The state, I wouldn't agree with Senator Smith, and I think the world of him. As you know, Mayor, I grew up in Deming, and I know Senator Smith well, but I don't agree with him on that point. I don't think that that's the right statement. Frankly, I believe that the communities that are out there shouldering the burden that you talk about, showing the state of New Mexico and the federal government, frankly, that you're willing to take on the needs of your community on your own shoulders, what you can afford to do, I think strengthens your hand as you go to Santa Fe and the feds to say, we're doing what we can do. Now we need help, to finish off whatever else it is that we have in the community. So I think it's converse to that.
I really put you on the spot there. I'm sorry about that, but
yeah, it's okay.
that was a really, it was a tough discussion to have with the senator, and I have a lot of respect for the senator as well. I don't think anybody understands the state budget as well as he does, but without totally revamping the tax code and the distributions of property tax and gross receipts to municipalities and counties, this is where we're at.
And if I may add to Mark's good answer there, without speaking with the senator, I'm not sure what all went into his analysis, but from a municipality perspective, the importance of, or the benefit of pledging a specific revenue stream for a local option gross receipts tax is that that's all you're pledging. You are not making a general obligation pledge to the bondholders who can come after any revenue that you have as a municipality. The law is set up to create special funds that you pledge. In doing that, these municipal local option taxes are excellent spots to do that, to say, all right, we're going to pledge this increment of municipal gross receipts tax or infrastructure gross receipts tax or capital outlay, whatever it might be. And the bondholders evaluate, or the investors, is this, getting back to the credit quality, is this something I want to invest in, knowing that the only revenue stream that they can access is that specific gross receipts tax revenue stream. No property taxes, no state share gross receipts taxes if it's not pledged, none of your other system revenues or other local option gross receipts taxes. So you do have to be careful in the state share gross receipts tax side. That probably funds most of your operations and a lot of what happens there. So you don't want to burden that impairs your ability to operate, and that may be where the senator's getting. But in this context, where you're looking at a very specific revenue stream that's pledged half for the water and half for these other capital projects you have, you've done a good job as a governing body from a policy standpoint saying we have specific projects we want to get done. We've identified the most surgical strike of a gross receipts tax that we have to do that, and we're not impairing or exposing any other revenue stream. So I think from a bonding capacity, that's a very advantageous way to go. And the law, judicially and statutorily, has been set up to encourage that, basically.
Just for the council's benefit, it's 331.5 is in New Mexico statute that he just referred to And there's two sections and two parts to Section 2 that very plainly state exactly what you just stated. Mark?
Well, let me take you through the details of the two pieces of the bonds that we're talking about. I've talked about this a bit already, but in discussing your financial, the revenues that you generate from your municipal local option gross receipts tax, structured this deal for the new money, the $5 million over 20 years, to hit level debt service, meaning almost the same annual payment over the next 20 years, so that you have certainty in knowing what that bill will be. It'll be a fixed rate. It will not jump up and down like a variable rate would. So you'll know exactly what it is. In this scenario that we've run with current pricing, your maximum annual payment is $380,000, $750. Now again, rates may change from today until we move forward on this, but we have a very high level of confidence that it will, if your bond rating comes in the single A category, that it'll be very close to this. So, and in discussing with Mr. Brown, I do believe that there will be enough revenue at this level to manage this debt with the increment that you just dedicated. Mr. Brown, do you want to say anything about that?
Basically, that is what the 1/8 is going to generate annually. So we're dedicating the exact amount of what is being taken there. And during the budget process, I did leave a reserve of $380,000 in case we did move this, so that the budget that you've seen, that you did pass, has this reserve set outside already.
And the particular structuring issues of this bond would be, these would be tax-exempt bonds. In other words, investors that buy them do not have to pay federal, and in New Mexico, they don't have to pay state tax on the earnings from these bonds. So they're willing to accept a slightly lower yield from you, or an interest rate from you. So in this case, I think the all-in interest rate is around 4.5%. To the investor, that looks more like 7.5%, because they're not paying earnings, they're not paying tax on those earnings. It's a benefit that the federal government provides to municipalities to encourage the municipalities to do exactly what Mayor Marshall was talking about, investing in themselves, taking on some of the burden on their own by issuing debt. They're also, because we're going to issue under $10 million in this calendar year, you can issue those at what we call bank qualified bonds. In other words, the interest rate exemption that the banks who would buy these, and there are many out there, there may even be local banks that may want to participate in buying these, they get a little bit better hit from the interest rate exemption. So they're even willing to take a little bit less interest rate from you, paid to them, because of this additional exemption that they see. A lot of banks seek out these kinds of tax-exempt, bank-qualified bonds for their own portfolios. So it gives us a bigger investor pool to work with. And then the final piece on this is we will likely have to put a reserve fund in place. Investors require this of most bonds, unless they're highly rated, AAA or high AA. But they require a debt service reserve fund of usually it's 1 year's annual payment to be set aside throughout the life of the bond. So in this example, we would say that we would set aside $380,000 in an account to serve as that reserve fund. What that would do is, if for some reason revenues at the town of Silver City fell off really sharply and you weren't able to make the payment, investors could go to that reserve fund and be paid out for that 1 year that you were not able to make the payment. And then we would all have a conversation about how we work that out and how we fix everything else out into the future if there is any payment left. Now, that reserve fund also becomes your last year's payment. So it's a 20-year deal, and that reserve fund makes your 20th payment. And while it's sitting in an account, it'll earn a small amount of interest that will accumulate to the fund to pay off some of the debt as well. So investors require it. It's an important piece. There may be some structuring things that we can do. Once we understand what your bond rating is, then we'll have more definitive information on where we go there. Those are the new money pieces, the 2011 A's. Let me take you more detail on the 2011 B's. Right now, you have a couple of loans with the Finance Authority, and Mr. Brown had mentioned this earlier. You don't necessarily use this increment of gross receipts to pay those off, or the state share gross receipts, but you can benefit by getting the better interest from the original structure we're talking about with a lower interest rate, and pay these notes off, and still use the remaining revenues that you're using to pay them off. So you're not using the 1/8 that you just passed. You're not using the state share. Those are only standing as pledge. You use the original revenues that you were to pay off. You just take advantage of a lower interest rate. And in this case, you have average coupons remaining to investors out there of about 3.6%. If you were to transact this with these current rates now, you would drop down to 2.24% for the remaining outstanding, and that provides you the savings that I had shared with you earlier. Cash flow of almost $120,000, net present value percentage savings at 3.243%. So, and then frankly, from a management standpoint, you don't have to track as many little notes that you still have remaining outstanding. You just have one payment to deal with those, and so it should streamline and make easier the debt management for the administration. And the final slide, which is titled Bond Process and Calendar, I'm going to invite Mr. Muirhead up to take you through. He's also going to share with you some of the other legal covenants associated with the bond issuance and what investors will require, and give you more of the timeline and the financing schedule. So,
Thanks, Mark.
yeah.
Do you have any other questions for Mark before I start?
Questions for Mark?
No, sir. Okay, all right, thank you all. I handed out to you an updated calendar as of yesterday, and already I'm going to tell you we're going to change a few things on the fly based on this morning. I was, as I mentioned, under the misunderstanding that it's a first reading of the gross receipts tax ordinance today. So, but we'll walk through this and it'll give you an overview of really how the process works. Feel free to raise any questions and I'll try to fill out how it all plays out. As indicated today, the special meeting today, and in adding that we adopt the gross receipts tax ordinance and potentially the intent resolution, which happens next on the agenda. We will submit tomorrow a notice of adoption of that amending gross receipts tax ordinance consistent with the New Mexico statutes. Going on to page 2, that Thursday, August 18th, we will distribute a draft of what's known as the parameters ordinance. This is a bond ordinance which pledges the whether it's the municipal gross receipts tax, if you're going to add that dual pledge of state share gross receipts tax, that would be in there. This is the legal obligation that lays out what your project is in general terms, and what, more importantly, what the pledge is of the revenues that you're going to use to repay the bonds. Once that parameters ordinance is adopted, that's what starts, we publish notice of adoption of that, and that's what starts a 30-day protest period, which is critical under the Municipal Revenue Bond Act. On August 23rd, you would have a first reading, take out the intent resolution and the GRT ordinance. You would have a first reading of the parameters ordinance just to give notice to the community and go through the traditional town processes. We would then, after that meeting next week, submit a notice of meeting and intent to adopt that would run at least 2 weeks prior to the actual consideration of that ordinance. And again, the state statutes under the municipal code and related to debt and related to just ordinances in general require a 2-week publication period for any ordinance, again, to give transparency and give the community full awareness of consideration of an ordinance. That would run in the Silver City Daily Press August 27th. Friday, September 2nd, this is the first part of it that relates to the marketing and disclosure of the town. Distribute drafted POS, that stands for preliminary official statement, so we'll clear that up. And what that is when you go to the capital markets, the public markets, the rating is very important, as Mark explained to you. But the investors also want to see disclosure about the town in general, the area, your economics, your economic base, your audit information. So what we do is we prepare that document. It's required under SEC rules and regulations. The market expects it so that they have a full reading on who the town of Silver City is. It's usually about 50 pages, then plus your audit. And what it does is gives an overview in general terms about the town, its economic base. It gives overview of the bond covenants, which we referenced earlier, which provide protection for the investor and lays out what the town is obligating itself to do. Those will be standard provisions. I don't envision anything unique from any other municipality bond ordinances. And really puts what you want to do, the law requires that you provide as clear and complete information on a material basis about the town and its economics and finances. We want to put our best foot forward, consistent with the requirements that we don't mislead or omit any material information. How that, in a practical sense, is we'll do a draft of that, and then we will come down and meet with the staff who will help us with that, and then we will walk through it with the council as a whole to make sure you're comfortable with what's in there as well before it gets posted. As you see on this calendar, as we move forward, there'll be a point where George K. Baum, through Mark and his office, post this preliminary official statement for investors to review. At that point, we deem it final, which means that everything in there, to the best of our knowledge, is accurate and complete. Comments are due on that draft, and that's, again, just the process of making sure that we've made it as complete and accurate as possible. Early September, we distribute a revised and final version of that parameters bond ordinance. At that point, we'd have to have a clear idea of whether you want to pledge just the municipal gross receipts tax or whether there is that backup pledge of state shared gross receipts tax. And this is very important, and I know we've talked about it a little bit, but it's a very important concept. Doing that dual pledge, that exposes both those revenue streams as protection for the bondholder. The structure and the sizing of the transaction will be done in a way that the town anticipates only needing the municipal gross receipts tax. If there should be a significant drop-off in those revenues, you need to be clear that by doing that dual pledge, you are exposing the state share gross receipts tax revenues to be tapped should they need to be. But the structure would be done in a way that your intentions are that it would not have to do that. The reason you do that, of course, as we talked about, it would increase the credit quality of the town's bonds. The relevant spot, Tuesday, September 13th, Mark would provide audits and rating information, and we would provide a draft of the preliminary official statement to the rating agencies, potentially bond insurers, if it determines that that is a better way to proceed. Tuesday, September 13th, that's when you would consider the parameters ordinance. That is one of two very significant steps for the town council. That one, again, starts the 30-day clock running and is the legal pledge of those revenues and sets forth the covenants and requirements. And when that time comes, believe me, we'll walk through that document and answer any questions you have about that. We'll take care of submitting the notice of adoption. The week of September 19th is a tentative date for the rating agency presentations. Again, as Mark indicated, it'd be the town making that presentation with the assistance of principally George K. Baum and Mark and myself as well to make sure that we give them all the relevant information they need. We would post that preliminary official statement October 3rd or that week of October 3rd. It should be contemporaneous with getting those bond ratings. Again, that document is important for giving the overview of the town, but also very critical. Right on the front page, it lists what your S&P rating or Moody's rating is. Bond pricing the week of October 11th. When it is priced that same day, which is the first meeting in October, is a second key step for the town council, which is to come back and approve the pricing terms in a resolution, not an ordinance, where it would lay out the maturities, it would lay out the interest rates, and you would have a clear view of what your debt service is going to be over the life of the debt. We then would do the official statement, which drops the preliminary, and this is all that is changed from the preliminary official statement are what are known as permitted omissions under SEC rules and regulations, pricing terms, insurance terms, prior redemption terms, anything that George K. Baum would do in the pricing that you don't know at the time of the preliminary official statement, but that of course you would know once they're priced and sold. That goes in the final official statement, which is provided to the investors. We'd handle closing documents the week of October 17th, and then look to close on or about October 26th. The key thing there again, Tuesday, October 18th, 30-day expiration of the action period. The New Mexico statutes provide that publication requirement as security and comfort not only to the town but to the bondholders, knowing that when that 30-day period expires, people are statutorily barred, anybody from contesting the bond ordinance or the sale of the bonds. And then the monies would be available October 26th on or about that date for the refunding portion, to pay off the existing debt, and then the new money portion, which would go into an improvement account, all of that created under the bond ordinance for use for those bond projects. Happy to answer any questions about it. Overall, once you get rolling, we try to move it along relatively fast, that you have it done in about a 60 to 90 day window.
Questions?
Mayor and Council, just to put this in perspective, the dedication of the 1/8% gross receipts tax and dedicating the state share, the payment is actually that Mark has suggested $380,000 is actually 4.5% of the total gross receipts taxes that we brought in last year. So we're not talking about a huge risk of taking revenues from other areas in case that the economy turned down. Even based on our worst year in revenues, based on 2009 gross receipts taxes, this would have accounted to about 5.2% of our total revenues. Okay, so we're not talking about a huge risk taking up a huge portion of our gross receipts in this bond issuance.
Councilor Bedison.
So if we pledge, that's our risk.
That's
we
our
pledge
risk.
our state share, our risk is 5% on an annual basis.
At the most.
At the most. Okay, that actually clarifies things, because you get a little concerned about pledging something that, we use to run the town on.
Yes.
If I may, Councilor Mayor. Alex, how much does the state share gross receipts tax percentage-wise take up of your total gross receipts tax coming in annually? What percentage is it?
The state share is about 32%.
Yeah, this is a very important point, and I'm glad we're having this discussion. The pledging it, you are exposing the full nut of state share gross receipts tax. Okay, so that would be the full 32%. If you only pledge the municipal gross receipts tax, how much percentage is that one increment?
That one increment is...
that's about the 4 to 5%. So if you just pledge that municipal gross receipts tax increment, your total exposure is just that. And that's how the pricing and the structure of the deal is. If you pledge a state share, your total exposure jumps up that 32%, although the odds of that, based on history and everything else, is extremely remote that you would have to tap anywhere near that. However, by pledging it, you may, if there is a downturn in the economy, have to tap it in a small way to make your debt service payments.
Councilor Morones.
For Alex, historically, we just got out of a bond. Didn't we just finish paying some bonds?
I believe it was 2 years ago.
And how much was that per year?
The last payment was $802,000.
So historically, this is doable. We've handled
that was based
twice
on,
that.
on quite a bit lower revenues.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Thanks.
And this doesn't take into account that through the financing, if you look at Revenue Bond B, much of our debt is going to be paid off. A large portion of our debt that we currently have is going to be paid off in the next 3 years.
Yeah, I was, just as a sidebar, looking at your audit this morning before coming over here. In the last 2 years, you've retired half a dozen outstanding obligations. And it looks to be, Mark knows it's much more than I, 3 or 4 things the next few years that are going to be retired as well. So from an overall debt capacity situation, or the outstanding debt, it's a very good situation for the town.
Comments or questions for either?
No.
You good?
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Bedison.
Mayor, I move for a short break.
There's a motion, a second, take a short break. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We're in recess. We'll call this special meeting back to order. And the next item on the agenda is approval, disapproval of resolution number 2011-30, declaring the intent of the Town Council of the Town of Silver City, New Mexico to consider for adoption an ordinance authorizing issuance of the Town of Silver City, New Mexico gross receipts tax improvement and refunding revenue bonds series 2011 for the purpose to 1, finance acquisition and construction of certain capital improvements for the benefit of the town and its residents, and 2, to refinance, pay, and discharge certain outstanding debt of the town, engaging certain professionals to act on behalf of the town in relation to issuance of the bonds, and directing the town manager and town clerk to take necessary action in connection with issuance of the bonds.
Mayor, I'll hand you all a clean copy of that
Resolution. There's one change to it to clarify. It's meaningful for Mr. Valenzuela. In Section 2, it references that George K. Baum is hereby engaged to act as underwriter for the town. Initially, that said financial advisor. That may not seem to be any significant difference. However, under federal regulations and SEC governance and municipal securities rulemaking board governance, it's critical whether he is acting as an underwriter or a financial advisor. In this transaction, he's acting as an underwriter. In that role, he explained to you earlier. So that's the only change. This is basically just a chance for the council to say, yeah, let's move forward. It's non-binding that you have to proceed with the bond issuance. It's just a comfort to the professionals involved and the staff that, yes, this is something you're interested in doing, and directs the staff, and we will help them with this, if not take care of it, to do the necessary publication for the notice of meeting for the parameters bond ordinance. Happy to answer any questions about it. It's again, its primary purpose is to give Mr. Valenzuela and myself comfort that this is something that you'd like us to proceed with working on, and the chance for you all to chime in at an early stage of the process.
And I think a little bit of clarification, the projects that we've presented to you, those are just preliminary projects, and we don't have to, those aren't the projects we're proceeding with as of this point.
Absolutely, and that ties into that financing schedule a minute ago. Really, when you're going to need the clearest description of the projects in the parameters ordinance, I think what we'll do is just keep it as broad as possible, similar to what you saw in the GRT amending ordinance. In the POS, or the preliminary official statement, I think what we'll have is more itemized, a list of options, saying here are 10, 15 projects that you all think are relevant and important, and that you're going to do some number of those. So I think by the time we get to that offering document to investors, we would have some specificity, but it wouldn't be, here are the 4, and these are the only 4, and we have full agreement on that. I think we'd give it in a way that says we have a clear idea, these are the relevant capital improvement projects that we care about, and then the latitude to decide where you go down the road.
And I think my intention would be in September, we probably have a work session with the council and the public and start breaking down that list and refining it. Councilor Bedison.
So, unlike my experience has been with general obligation bonds through the university, because I worked there. And so there you have to actually specify what the project's going to be and what it entails.
Yeah,
and you can't deviate from that. But with the municipal bonds, we can actually give the investors a sense that these are the projects we're interested in, and some number will be done, as you stated.
An excellent question, an excellent distinction. In a general obligation bond, there is an election required with that. And in that point in the election, you have to be particularly clear to the electorate or the voters about, here are what we want to do. Are you in favor or not in favor? And so specificity is critical, and the ability to deviate is very, very limited. With this, with the special revenue fund, getting back to the idea of this very limited gross receipts tax pledge, you don't have to have that hammered down to the finest detail as early. And you have much more flexibility as a governing body to decide how you want to do it.
Right, so that allows us the
Yes.
flexibility to make our decisions rather than making them.
At a very early stage.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Just a few comments. The state basically sets what we can impose gross receipts tax for, what we can spend the gross receipts tax on, how we can manage that gross receipts. They audit us for compliance on the gross receipts and all of our other transactions. The state sets the rules for municipalities to issue bonds on different levels. The state established many years ago a capital outlay program that had at least one major flaw as pertains to us, which was sustainability, and we've seen that go away. And then the state establishes the distribution of the taxes from gross receipts and property tax, which is, generally speaking, the counties live and die on property tax and municipalities live and die on gross receipts tax. And then a senator tells me that none of our revenue should be bonded against. It's just kind of frustrating to us. It's not, in my opinion, a very well thought out comment that was made to me without making a recommendation to change the laws or hamstring every municipality in this state with the financing that is authorized by the state. What this whole process that we've laid out is to allow us to pick up the fault that the state dropped in capital outlay process and to address our own issues. We had a issue with and a discussion on the council about the constitutional issues where it provides for us to address the life, safety, health of our citizens, and it implores the legislature to empower local governments more so than not. This is right in line with that. We're taking that argument from basically the fireworks issue, where we argued that the state did not have the authority to regulate our fireworks, and we're moving that over to this issue, which says they should empower us. The Constitution of this state implores them to empower local governments. They have not kept up their end of the deal, where they collect taxes and they historically sent them back to the local governments. Now they do not. And we have to develop a system to make sure that we can maintain our viability as a community. And I think this process and this resolution specifically sets us on that course, and we will be in much better shape and be able to address the quality of life issues that are so important to this region and make up the gaps that we don't have as far as industry. Any other discussion on Resolution 2011-30? I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve Resolution Number 2011-30, declaring the intent of the Town Council of the Town of Silver City, New Mexico, to consider for adoption an ordinance authorizing issuance of the Town of Silver City, New Mexico, gross receipts tax improvement and refunding revenue bonds, Series 2011, for the purpose to, 1, finance acquisition and construction of certain capital improvements for the benefit of the town and its residents, and 2, to refinance, pay, and discharge certain outstanding debt of the town, engaging certain professionals to act on behalf of the town in relation to issuance of the bonds, and directing the town manager and town clerk to take necessary action in connection with issuance of the bonds.
Mr.
Mr. Mayor, I second that motion as stated.
There's a motion and a second to approve Resolution 2011-30. Is there any discussion? There's a motion and a second. No further discussion. Roll call, please.
Council Basin?
Aye.
Council Thompson?
Aye.
Council Ray?
Aye.
Council Morales?
Aye.
Motion carries. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Ray.
Motion to adjourn.
I second the motion as stated.
There's a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned.